New mask guidance from the CDC, even if you're vaccinated. Simone Biles' gymnastics future at the Olympics, uncertain. And the country's biggest private employer is offering free college for all. Wednesday Need to Know. Let's go. Good morning. This is Cheddar's Need to Know podcast for Wednesday, July 28th. I am Jill Wagner with Carlo Versano. Hey, Carlo, good morning.
Good morning, Wags. How are you today?
I am okay. Let's get to the news. We've got a lot of it on this Wednesday morning. The CDC has now revised its previous guidance on mask wearing, now recommending masks for vaccinated people indoors in places where the Delta variant is surging. The CDC now also recommends universal masking for schools, regardless of vaccination status, also saying that schools should reopen in the fall. The criteria for indoor masking applies to areas with high or substantial levels of transmission. Based on the CDC's map, about 2/3 of U.S. counties currently fall under that category, including big cities like New York, San Francisco, and Los Angeles.
Yeah, Manhattan, where there are 4 hospitalizations a day for a population of 1.7 million. The masks until when? I mean, that's the question, I think. Like, what's the end game? Are they don't ever say, like, we're going to do this until we hit a certain milepost or anything. That's sort of like my issue with it. Because this isn't the last variant that we're going to see, right? We really, like I've said before, I think we have to start treating this thing like it's an endemic virus that it is. It's not something that we're going to get rid of. Plus, I think the real problem is, if this helps, I'm all for it. But I don't think it's going to actually make a difference in places where it matters, right? In these pockets of severely under-vaccinated America. The only question that I have now for any federal health official or White House official is, why haven't these vaccines been fully approved yet? So we're going on 6-7 months here. What is the cost-benefit analysis that is happening inside the FDA right now? Because I think you can argue that full approval is really the only one of, at least, the last tools that we have left in getting our numbers up.
I think you're right, because the firefighters union in New York City, they came out against the decision for mandatory vaccinations for city workers, saying, how can you mandate a vaccine that still only has emergency approval? I mean, that was basically their argument. And they're saying they're not anti-vaxxers, but that is exactly the argument. So part of the reason for the reversal in the decision on the masks is that the science has changed. Okay, so we now know that people who are vaccinated and get COVID, that they do have the same viral load as people who are unvaccinated. That does not mean that they're getting as sick, right? Most people who are vaccinated who have COVID wind up with pretty mild symptoms. However, originally scientists thought that they wouldn't be able to spread the virus as effectively as people who are unvaccinated. That is what has changed. So that is why the mask mandate has changed. And I think one of the reasons you and I see this differently is because, and I think that the CDC or who's ever making this, I think that what they see is they think a mask mandate indoors allows people to, prevents another shutdown. It allows people to do more things and feel more normal and be out there. But I think you make a good point, to what end. But that is what has changed. That's why the science has changed. And I wanted to get on the record, because it was just a couple of days ago that I said on this podcast that the viral load of somebody who was vaccinated was less than somebody who was unvaccinated.
Right.
Because that was what the science was saying at the time. That's not true.
Yeah, I don't know what else to say. Okay, I mean, I've started wearing masks again inside because Becky told me to, so.
She's the boss.
She makes the rules.
Okay, breaking overnight, Simone Biles, the biggest star of the Olympics, has withdrawn from tomorrow's all-around gymnastics final to focus on her mental health. The decision came a day after Biles stunned just about everyone by taking herself out of the team competition, saying that she just couldn't mentally continue. The Russians took gold in that competition. The U.S. women settled for silver. Biles had struggled on the vault and walked off the floor with the trainer, leading to some rumors that perhaps she was physically injured. She later said that she did feel fine physically, but that, quote, it varies emotionally. Suni Lee and Jade Carey will represent the U.S. in the all-around tomorrow in Biles' place. Jordan Childs basically had to step in,
Yeah.
and I mean, what kind? Stepping into Simone Biles' shoes with no warning. She performed beautifully. She had one minor stumble, but I mean, kudos to her.
I think you could argue that Biles maybe even saved the women's team from a bronze or not even making the medal podium, just given how bad that her vault score was. There's a lot of takes flying around about this, about whether she did the right thing here. I think that, she did the right thing for herself, right? Gymnastics is dangerous. It's not like it's tennis or golf, right? You could really kill yourself out there if you're not in the right headspace. So I think that she's obviously one of, if not the greatest gymnast of all time. So she made the decision that was right for her. And it wasn't really that surprising if you read any of the interviews that she had been doing ahead of these Olympics. A lot of times they interview athletes and they're like, I can't wait to get there and just compete and win. And it's like, all I'm thinking about. She wasn't really saying that. When the New York Times asked her what the happiest moment of her career was, she answered quote, probably my time off.
Wow.
She told the Today Show back in April that the only reason she was even going to Tokyo was to be a voice for sexual abuse survivors, as she herself was a victim of Larry Nassar. So again, right, it's like we talked about this with Naomi Osaka, like this Olympics is really hard, right? You don't have your family there, you don't have your friends there. There's all these regulations in place. Not to mention just the last year and a half has just been really hard on people.
Simone Biles' withdrawal came just as Japan shut out the U.S. to win gold in softball during another uneven day for Team USA. So here's the latest. The U.S. Women's soccer team advanced after a 0-0 draw with Australia. The U.S. women's basketball team opened its run for gold by beating Nigeria, the team's 50th straight Olympic win, while the men's team easily beat Iran. In swimming, Katie Ledecky rebounded after her fifth-place finish in the 200-meter freestyle. Just a few minutes later, she actually won gold in the 1,500-meter, which is her first gold of these games and the sixth of her career. Hungary upset the top-ranked U.S. in women's water polo in preliminary play. The Americans had won gold in water polo at the last two Olympics.
I think that this is really not good for NBC, right? From a business perspective, with Osaka and Biles out now, we're only a quarter of a way through these Olympics, right? And you got two of your biggest stars and a couple of the biggest storylines already done for. We're going to need some really amazing narratives and stories to develop.
Just to be clear, it is possible that Simone Biles will still compete in the Olympic Games. So she's withdrawn from the team competition. That was yesterday. The individual all-around competition, which is tomorrow. But she still could decide to compete in the individual event competition. That is next week. She said she's going to be taking it day by day. And with Simone Biles, she needs to do what's good for her. I mean,
sure.
she has to answer. Ultimately, everyone has to look at themselves in the mirror,
Right.
And I think you made a great point in terms of just how incredibly dangerous what she's trying to do is. Anyway, there's one storyline that I wanted to mention.
Please.
Iranian-born judoka Saeed Malay, he won a silver medal as part of the Mongolian team. His backstory is that he actually had to flee Iran in 2019. That's because he had refused to forfeit his match against an Israeli. Sagi Muki. That was the Iran policy. It still is.
Right.
So the two wound up forming a close friendship. Saeed trained in Israel at one point. When he won his silver medal, he actually thanked Israelis for their good energy. He said, the medal's dedicated to you as well, and I hope Israelis are happy with this victory. He said toda, which is, I believe, thank you in Hebrew. Also, Ronen Ginsburg, he's the Israeli who coaches the Czech Republic's basketball team. He shook hands with the coach of the Iranian team shortly before their match. So, it is nice to see, athletes and coaches putting politics aside in the Olympics here. It's not all like that. The Palestinian Olympic Committee has called for all athletes to boycott Israel and forfeit matches against Israelis. An Algerian judoka and his coach were actually suspended because they refused to compete against an Israeli athlete this week. But again, there are these storylines, and you see how sometimes sports just really can bring people together.
What is judoka?
Pardon?
What is a judoka?
Judo.
Oh, judo. Okay.
I guess someone who does
a person who
that's
does.
what they're
I
called.
see.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. You learn something new every day.
Okay, Carlo, the other big story that arguably could have been our lead story today, police officers who defended the Capitol during the January 6th riot told their stories to the congressional panel investigating what happened that day. In hours of emotional testimony, cops described a medieval battle scene at the seat of the U.S. government. Capitol Police Officer Harry Dunn said he was repeatedly called racist slurs by members of the mob, which he described as being sent by a hitman. Dunn's colleague, Sergeant Aquilino Gunnell, recalled thinking that he felt like he was going to die as he was crushed by supporters of the former president. Representative Liz Cheney, one of two Republicans on the panel, opened the first hearing by saying the country could face violence every 4 years if those responsible for the Capitol riot are not held accountable.
Really some harrowing testimony from that I caught yesterday. I couldn't actually watch too much of this. It was like pretty upsetting stuff. You know, the thing with January 6th is like the narrative on the sort of like Tucker Carlson right is that this thing wasn't that bad. The reality was it was actually way worse, I think, and could have been really catastrophic if not for, you know, the stars aligning in such a way that like none of these representatives were actually hurt. And just as these cops testified to yesterday, I think you really got a picture of that. And look, maybe this may come off as sort of maudlin or overwrought, but I had this really strong reaction last night, catching up on this testimony, also reading the latest CDC bulletin. I just have this feeling, and I'm putting this out there not as a way to sound like sanctimonious. I'm putting it out there because it's how I feel, and therefore I think it's probably how other people feel, and we've got to work this stuff out, right? But it's this sense that like my life, right, and my country are in the hands of this minority of people with whom I have nothing in common. I don't have any like shared values or beliefs with them. And again, the vaccine issue is bigger than politics. I appreciate that, and I want to say that again. But you can certainly map it onto the January 6th mob. And what the pandemic and the election, particularly what happened after the election, both just made incredibly clear is just this complete breakdown in social trust in America. There's just this collapse of truth in authorities, in institutions. Nothing is as it seems. There's no shared truth. This didn't really happen. The game is rigged. Just this nihilistic worldview, and the vaccine stuff is part of this too. And I don't know what to do about it. I really don't.
There's no good answer. I mean, everybody at this point, everyone gets information from sources that they think are telling them the truth. There's no such thing as just kind of objective journalism, or at least objective journalism that people think is objective. One of the things, and I think you make a good point in terms of listening to this testimony. I mean, we thought it was horrific, but we didn't even know the half of it. Yeah. I mean, that's what stood out for me.
Absolutely, yeah.
And just the blatant racism from some of these people who stormed the Capitol. I want to read, because I couldn't believe it,
Sure.
a little bit of the testimony from Capitol Police Officer Harry Dunn. He is black, okay? So this is his testimony. And if you missed it, I think this says so much, right? Okay, so he said, the rioters told him, "We are here to stop the steal. Joe Biden is not the president. Nobody voted for Joe Biden." Dunn then told him he voted for Biden and said, "Does my vote not count? Am I nobody?" And he said, quote, that prompted a torrent of racial epithets. One woman in a pink MAGA shirt yelled, "You hear that, guys? This N-word voted for Joe Biden." And then the crowd, perhaps around 20 people, joined in screaming, "Boo," and then repeating the N-word. And then he later added that other black officers at the Capitol that day that he had spoken with had told him that they had similar experiences. Compare that, though, to the white officer, Michael Hodges, who also testified, and he described the events of the day as a white supremacist insurrection. He said white nationalist organizations had been in attendance, and unlike the black officers, he said some of the protesters were trying to recruit him. One of them came up to him and said, "Are you my brother?" It's just mind-blowing. And for these officers who are out there, I mean, there's no excuse, period. But for these officers who are out there trying to protect the Capitol, basically save democracy, for them to be subject to that kind of abuse.
It's horrible.
It's horrible.
I mean, I think it was Dunn who said, he was like, "I went to Iraq, and this was, that was nothing compared to this."
Yeah, I mean, and so in terms of, we had the question of what new was going to come out in terms of the investigations. I guess this is why you look into things, right? You find out information that you didn't previously know.
Right.
Switching gears, Walmart will be starting to offer free college tuition and books to all of its 1.5 million U.S. employees. The country's largest retailer dropping a $1 per day fee for its workers who want to earn a degree from a handful of partnering schools like the University of Arizona. The company also sweetening the pot by picking up the tab on books. About 28,000 Walmart employees currently participate in that program.
This was a big one yesterday. Walmart framing this as a way, basically anything Walmart does is big just because it has just such a gigantic workforce, right? The company framing this as a way to decrease the student debt load, which is admirable, but I think what it really is just a way to retain talent at the sort of lower end of the labor pool, which remains just insanely competitive. And you see it walking down the street, at least I see it in Brooklyn, right? Every retailer, every restaurant, every cafe still got help wanted signs in the window.
To Wall Street, where Microsoft, Apple, and Google all crushed their quarterly earnings, showing once again how dominant a handful of American tech companies have become in the global economy. Microsoft posting its highest revenue ever. Apple delivered monster results thanks to worldwide demand for the iPhone 12. And Google parent company Alphabet saw revenue jump 62% on a huge pent-up demand for digital advertising.
Yeah, one interesting thing regarding Apple that I saw, the iPhone is now a smaller part of the overall revenue pie for that company, 52% of sales versus 62% in 2018. So that was something that we talked about a little bit a while ago, right? They're trying to sort of diversify so it's not just the iPhone into TV and all these other service products. Anyway, this big tech story continues today. Facebook reporting after the bell. Amazon tomorrow. We will likely see more blowout results from these companies, which basically just dominate all of the economy now.
We still don't know for Apple. They kind of alluded to the chip shortage that we're seeing and how it's going to impact at least the supply side of things. That's one area of, I think, just uncertainty for that company.
That story is actually, I think that it's actually an underreported story.
The chip shortage?
The chip shortage. It's really, the fact that it's still going on and just how many different things that it's affecting, it's remarkable.
I mean, look, we're in the market for a new car, and first, our lease on our one car is up, and they won't let us just extend it. I mean, that was the thinking, that we were just going to extend the lease, and they won't let us extend it. We're actually borrowing my in-laws' car. My dad and I were chatting, and he was saying, they have two cars, one for my mom and one for my dad, and they looked to get their leases up on one of them, and they said, my dad said it's so expensive that they've just decided they're going to have one car. He's just like, it's crazy. It's just too expensive. But this is the issue. It's like you cannot. It's wild. But all of these cars are so reliant. They're basically like big computers on wheels these days.
Yeah, exactly.
And they need these chips.
Exactly.
Okay, New York City putting on a series of large concerts next month to celebrate the, quote, comeback of the original COVID hotspot in the U.S. So now they've got this lineup of the biggest of shows in Central Park. Andrea Bocelli, LL Cool J, The Killers, Journey, Paul Simon, Patti Smith, Bruce Springsteen. They are all among the headliners for this August 21st event. All 5 of the homecoming week concerts, one for each borough, is going to require proof of vaccination to attend.
LL Cool J and Journey together. Who can possibly miss that? These concerts the tickets are free. 80% of the tickets are free at least. But you know my rule of thumb, Jill. After living in New York City for 15 years, never go to a free event. That's the rule. It's just not worth it. It's too many people, too crazy. It's just never, the infrastructure is never good. Just, stay home. Watch it on CNN.
It's a kid's game, right? Like it's for the youth to go.
You're not waiting in line to get into the Great Lawn for any reason. But
the symbolism of just this idea that we thought this was going to be hot vax summer, and now everyone's calling it hot mask summer. The fact that we're back here and we didn't really need to be. If people would just get this freaking vaccine,
I know.
We could put this whole thing behind us.
Oh, Jill, it's so depressing.
We could go on and on.
Yeah, I know.
All right, let's leave it there. That is what you need to know for Wednesday, July 28th.
All right, guys, see you tomorrow.